and welcome to the How Do I Knit That podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Dawn of Sarah Dawn's Designs, and this 16th episode of the How Do I Knit That podcast is all about lace. We'll talk the two main types of lace, the basics of lace knitting, and some troubleshooting of what to do when things go wrong. So, broadly, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast came about because I hear so many people saying, "Oh, I could never knit that. Oh, I could never make that." And I think that's really sad. I'm a firm believer in the idea that anyone can knit or crochet or quilt or whatever your chosen art is. All it takes is some knowledge, the right tools, the right techniques, and the willingness to get a little ingenious. If you're looking for the previous podcast episodes, you can find them on my Patreon, which I will link to in the description, or in a YouTube playlist, which I will also link to in the description. First, let's start with the obvious question. What is lace? Well, according to Wikipedia, I know. Lace knitting is a style of knitting characterized by stable holes in the fabric arranged with consideration of aesthetic value. Lace is sometimes considered the pinnacle of knitting because of its complexity and because woven fabrics cannot easily be made to have holes. I'm not sure I agree with the pinnacle of knitting comment because other forms of lace absolutely exist. Crochet lace is a thing, as is tatting, but it is one of the more complex forms of knitting. Please don't let that turn you off though. Complex does not have to mean difficult. Okay, but how are those holes in the lace made without all the stitches unraveling? The most common method, by far, is using a yarn over stitch, which increases one stitch and creates a hole in the fabric. In British terms, you may see this as yarn forward, abbreviated YFWB, along with its counterparts, yarn around needle, abbreviated YRN, yarn over needle, abbreviated YON, and yarn forward round needle, abbreviated YFRN, but the effect is exactly the same. The difference in terms is based on if the yarn is starting at the front or the back of the work, and if the yarn is going to the front or the back of the work. But at the end of the stitch, you should end up with an extra loop of yarn going over the needle between two stitches. If you want your lace work to remain the same width, you will, somewhere in the same row, work a decreased stitch to account for the stitch you just increased. However, many times the yarn over stitch is used as a stitch increase to shape the finished lace. You'll see this often in many different shawl constructions, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes. So, now that that's settled, what are the two main types of lace? Though the names vary, simplistically, one version of lace has lace work worked every other row. This is sometimes called knit lace or lacy knitting, while the second version of lace has lace worked every row. This is sometimes called true lace. This doesn't have a lot of basis, however. The only important thing you need to know here is that if you're working your knitting flat, that is, knitting on the right side of the work and purling on the wrong side of the work, you will have to do your yarn overs and corresponding decreases using purl stitches, which some people find more difficult. Especially depending on your knitting style, stitches like purl two together through the back loop can get quite challenging, and many decreases don't have a corresponding wrong side decrease. Oh, and a quick tangent here. Well, most lace is assumed to be worked in stocking stitch, knit on the right side of the work, purl on the wrong side of the work. That's not a requirement. You can work lace in garter stitch or on a background of reverse stocking stitch. But generally, a background of stocking stitch is chosen for lace, mostly because of the aesthetics. Stocking stitch provides the best background to the intricacies of the lace stitches. Also, while we're tangenting, what is the difference between lace and eyelets? Technically none. Lace is just many yarn over eyelets very close together, but many people informally define lace as a more open, mesh-like fabric, while eyelets are usually only a few holes and a more dense fabric. Now, in true ADHD storytelling methodology, let's jump around to something else I mentioned, those decreases. Lace is a style of knitting where the direction of your decreases definitely matters. What does that mean? Well, many knit decreases have a slant to them. Not all, but most, and the most common stitches definitely do. The knit two together slants to the right, while the SSK, slip slip knit, slants to the left. This means that one stitch of the decrease will end up on top, while the other stitch falls underneath. This can create visual lines of decreased stitches, which is actually a part of lace design. Becca Norman has a great blog post that illustrates this, and I put that link in the description too. Now, let's get a bit more confusing. Do you remember how I mentioned that sometimes lace increases, yarn overs, and decreases are worked on the wrong side of the work as well, this matters now too. So the counterpart to knit two together is, somewhat logically, purl two together. This makes sense, right? Except a purl two together stitch leans to the left, right? Well, remember, lace is traditionally worked on a background of stocking stitch, with the purl stitches being on the wrong side row. So, if a purl two together leans left, when we flip the work around to the right side, it leans right. Remember that anything on the wrong side of the knitted work has to be reversed, and this includes the direction your stitches lean. Continuing this idea, the SSP, slip, slip, purl, slants to the right when viewed from the purl side of the work. Flip that back around to the knit side of the work, and it slants to the left like SSK. The reason decreases are so important in lace is because every yarn over creates a new stitch. This means that for every yarn over, the object gets one stitch wider. Without working a corresponding decrease, your lace object would just keep getting wider and wider at an exponential rate. So, in order to maintain the same width, each time you work a yarn over stitch, somewhere in the row there's a corresponding decrease. If you don't want to maintain the same width, like for example if you're knitting a triangular shawl, you don't have to account for every yarn over stitch. But even in a triangular shawl, you're usually only increasing 2 or 4 stitches in a row. If you have 12 yarn overs in a row, well, that's not going to be the triangular shape you want without compensating for at least a few of those yarn overs. With all this, it's very easy to think that if you make a mistake in lace, well, that's it, you're done. I promise you, you're not. But before I get into that, I want to remind folks about why I created this podcast. I intend to talk about all sorts of knitting, crocheting, and crafting stuff so that you can create amazing things in whatever situation you're in. Remember, you can, in fact, knit that. And when I say knit that, I also mean crochet that or spin that. It really applies to pretty much any craft I can think of. And for those things to talk about, I'll be relying on you, my listeners and audience. I want to hear what keeps you from knitting or crocheting, and I'll try and address the barriers you mentioned. It can be anything at all. I'll at least try and give you some advice. If you're having trouble with a particular technique, are wondering how to knit with limited or no time, or can't find tools that work for you, please reach out and I'll try and address your concern on the podcast. I'll even do pattern support, provided the pattern is free, online, and accessible to me, or one I can find at my local library. And of course, I'm able to answer questions about my own designs as well. You can submit your questions by email and have them be read on the show, or you can submit an MP3 voice recording, and I'll play it on the podcast. So, with lace being, admittedly, one of the more complex forms of knitting, what can we do if we make a mistake? How can we fix it? First, let's make it so that a mistake or drop stitch can't ruin your whole project. We'll do that with something called a lifeline. This is aptly named. It's a line of fine yarn that runs through the stitches of your lace. It means a drop stitch can't unravel past this point, and it means that if you're unraveling your lace to fix it, you can't accidentally unravel past this point. You can create a lifeline one of two ways. The first is by threading a thread through your stitches with a tapestry needle. You can also use a spare circular needle with a long cord for this, below where your mistake is. You can also use this technique to insert a lifeline, even if there isn't a mistake. The second way is to make use of the fact that some interchangeable needle tips have a hole where you can thread a lifeline through. So as you knit the row or round, your lifeline will be threaded automatically. Now, I don't often use interchangeable needles. I have horrible luck with the needle tips coming unscrewed. It's something to do with my knitting style. But if you do, then this might be a time-saving option for you. How often should you put a lifeline in? That depends on you. The general advice is to put them in at a pattern repeat or a point where the lace motif changes. Or be like me and constantly forget to put them in. I admit, I usually only ever remember to put a lifeline in after I've made a giant mistake. The way a lifeline works is that it holds your stitches. So you can unravel your work to fix it without the fear of unraveling too far. And if you have to frog back completely, you A, know where you are because you know the row you put the lifeline in on, and B, you can't accidentally drop a stitch and have your lace unravel further. Speaking of lace unraveling, let's talk about that. You're going to hear that you can't drop down and re-knit lace. And, no. You absolutely can. It's just more fiddly and complex than dropping down and re-knitting stocking stitch. But if you've ever dropped down and re-knit a cable, then you can do exactly the same thing for lace. There's one big caveat here. Since lace knitting uses those increases and decreases, you can end up having to unravel some decreased stitches and thusly end up with a much wider section of drop-down stitches. This is why a spare needle and a lifeline are so helpful. If in taking down 30 stitches you accidentally miss one, it will only be able to drop as far down as the lifeline. But otherwise, dropping down and correcting lace is exactly the same as dropping down and re-knitting any other pattern stitch, be it knit and purl or cables. It is just quite fiddly, and you have to be sure you know exactly where you are on the pattern. Double and triple check your pattern chart or your written instructions and your row count. I'm going to be honest here and say that sometimes dropping down and fixing lace can require a good chunk of your work, and it is faster and easier just to frog back and reknit the whole thing. And again, this is where a lifeline comes in super useful. If you've put a lifeline in, you don't have to worry about frogging back too far. Just happily rip it back to your lifeline, ball the ball up as you unravel so there's no fear of tangles, then pick your stitches back up onto your needle, make sure they're the right way around, and redo your mistake with confidence. Speaking of confidence, well, that's really the biggest key to lace. People are often intimidated, especially by complex lace. But if you can do the basic decreases, knit two together, SSK, SSP, and purl two together, as well as the yarn over stitch, you can knit lace. I promise. And that seems like a good note to wrap up this podcast episode on. A huge thanks to my patrons who supported the podcast. You folks can submit an MP3 audio or MP4 video file of your questions for the podcast over on Patreon. The podcast archive is available on my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/SarahDawnsDesigns, and future episodes will be available on YouTube as well. Patrons usually get access on the second Wednesday of every other month, and the podcast is available to the public a week after that, so the third Wednesday of every other month. Well, that's it for episode 16. Follow or subscribe to be notified for the next episode, and thank you once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and remember, you can, in fact, knit that. Happy crafting!